Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Martin. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer at Carbon Reform. Excited to see so many people joining today. Um, and this video will be available afterwards, and we'll send it to anybody who did register who wasn't able to attend today. If anybody has questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will most likely answer them towards the end, so we can make sure we get through the presentation in the next 25 or so minutes. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today's topic is turning Colorado's Regulation 28 into an opportunity for building owners. So not only will we talk about the Colorado regulation, we'll also talk about a Denver building performance standard and how Carbon Reform's technology can play an important role in helping buildings meet their net zero goals and avoiding some of these penalties. So I wanted to provide first a little bit background on Colorado's Regulation 28. This was administered by Colorado Energy Office and approved by the State Air Quality Control Commission. This regulation affects commercial, multifamily, and public structures that are over 50,000 square feet or more. The goal here is to cut greenhouse gas emissions from the built environment in Colorado by 90% by 2050, and this is according to the 2005 levels. There's two performance periods running, and they're starting as soon as this year. The first one is cutting those levels 7% by 2026, and the second is cutting those greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2030. Now, the benchmarking reports have been submitted over the past several years, but the fines associated with not submitting the reports will start as early as 2026. So you can see here the different deadlines that are fast approaching. This goes all the way through 2031. We have a quote at the bottom here that I think is reflective of just the concerns around meeting some of these standards and the potential costs of retrofitting technology. And that's why we wanted to have this presentation today to talk about our Carbon Reform's approach to retrofitting commercial buildings in a way that can actually create a fast payback period such that you're not caught with these highly capitally expensive retrofits. So digging a little bit more into the penalties for non-compliance, and again, this was starting in June of this year, failure to report on the benchmarking is $500 for the first violation, and there's $2,000 for every subsequent year after that you don't submit the benchmark. In addition to that, failure to actually meet the building performance standards results in a $2,000 fine for first violation. And then for every month not in compliance thereafter, it's $5,000 a month. So again, this is for commercial buildings in the entire state of Colorado. Now, I want to dig deeper into Energize Denver, which is specific for city and county buildings in Denver over 25,000 square feet. So in addition to the Regulation 28 for Colorado, there are several buildings in the state, specifically those that are in the city and county of Denver, that will also be impacted by this building performance policy. This again is commercial and industrial buildings. This is for buildings over 25,000 square feet. So note that it is a difference from the Regulation 28, which is for buildings over 50,000 square feet. The benchmarking reports and compliance dates are for 3 different years. So that's 2026, 2028, and 2031. And the way that these fines are determined is based on the energy use intensity of the building. And the metric used to define this is the kilobtu per building. And I'll talk more about that and how that relates to certain buildings moving forward. So it's worth noting that there is the fine associated with going above your kilobtu threshold, but there's also going to be a fine associated after the year 2030 with buildings that don't maintain going below that 2030 target. So it's important that you create long-term solutions to make sure that your building is below those EUI targets for 2030 and thereafter. Worth noting that different buildings have different EUI targets. There's actually over 70 different building types. You can learn more about what your type of building yours is and the specific EUI targets for those 3 dates at denvergov.org. Also, through Energize Denver, there's a really interesting benchmarking map, a really interactive benchmarking map that shows all of the buildings that are impacted by this building performance policy in the city and county of Denver. So what you see here is any thing that is green is a building that is in compliance with benchmarking, meaning they have submitted their reports. Red is not submitted, and then black is exempt buildings. We have noted here that there are about 40% of buildings covered by the rule already meeting the 2026 targets, but only 20% meeting the 2030 targets. So there's a large number of buildings that maybe are at the point where they're trying to figure out other ways to meet these pretty intense targets over the next 5 years. And we hope at Carbon Reform that we can provide one of those solutions to help buildings decarbonize. So in terms of pathways to compliance, there's 3 main pathways that are laid out for Regulation 28 and Energize Denver. The first is through energy efficiency, implementing energy efficiency measures and technologies. The second is through greenhouse gas reduction, and that's largely through replacing fossil fuel equipment with highly efficient electrical equipment or purchasing RECs. And the third is a standard reduction pathway, which revolves around reducing building energy or greenhouse gas emissions. For the purpose of today's presentation and as it relates to our technology at Carbon Reform, we'll be focused on the first and the third. So we'll be focused on the energy efficiency pathway and the standard reduction pathway. Note that any one of these pathways is a way to meet compliance, so you don't have to have all 3 in order to avoid the penalties. So I want to take a step back now and introduce Carbon Reform, the company that my co-founder and I started 5 years ago, and how we're creating a novel approach to building decarbonization that has the co-benefits of energy savings, energy efficiency, and improvements in indoor air quality. Now, those of you on the call right now might already be familiar with this first statistic, but 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings. So that's building operations and embodied carbon that's used to make buildings and maintain them. What's really interesting, and as it plays into where Carbon Reform factors in, is that HVAC, commercial building HVAC and building HVAC is 40% of that 40%. So 16% of global greenhouse gas emissions are actually coming from the heating, cooling, and movement of air in the built environment around the world. Now, we included this quote here from Governor Polis of Colorado because he noted that climate action is possible in combination with energy savings and energy efficiency. I think sometimes it's thinking that these things go against each other, but as we'll show in our business model and how we're approaching our technology, we are able to help buildings meet their net zero goals, save energy, and improve their indoor air quality so their tenants and their employees are healthier. The problem up until now is that buildings are having to choose between energy efficiency and indoor air quality. And what that means is typically to deal with high concentrations of indoor air pollutants, you have to heat and cool and bring in more fresh air from the outside. The heating and cooling and movement of the air is where buildings are spending a lot of their energy and the majority of their HVAC on their HVAC costs. The hidden culprit in all of this is carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is a function of occupancy. So meaning the more people you have in the building, the more CO2 that will be present, and the more you'll need to bring in fresh air from the outside. But it is possible, if you're able to control the concentration of CO2 inside the building by scrubbing it from the air, you can actually reduce heating and cooling costs of outside air. And that's exactly what we are able to achieve here with our flagship product, the Carbon Capsule. So this is a really exciting piece of hardware that retrofits into existing construction and can be also designed for new builds. And it's able to create a side stream within the return air duct of a building, continuously removing carbon dioxide and other indoor air pollutants from the air. So while our core innovation is in the CO2 scrubbing, we also have technology with partners for volatile organic compounds scrubbing of particulate matter, and removal of bacteria and viruses. And it's important that we're focused on all indoor air pollutants, because as you'll see in the next couple of slides, we're reintroducing this air back into the supply and recycling this return air. So it's important too that the CO2 that we remove as a climate company is permanently sequestered. So the CO2 that we remove from the built environment is actually sequestered on site into an aggregate, into limestone, essentially. And that's really exciting for us because that limestone, that carbon negative limestone that we can create, we're actually partnering with downstream companies like concrete companies, carpet companies, where it can be used as aggregate in those ingredient mixes to build future construction. So not only are we focused on decarbonizing the HVAC operations, but we can decarbonize the embodied carbon of future buildings as well. Now, what we've already been able to show, which is very exciting, is by deploying our carbon capsule throughout a building, we can save up to 50% of HVAC-related energy costs. To give you an idea, that's about 16 to 20% of building-wide energy demand. So as you'll see in the case studies I show in a few slides regarding buildings that are impacted by Regulation 28 and Energize Denver, we have a huge opportunity just with our technology to help buildings even meet their 2030 targets, their 2030 EUI targets. The energy savings alone, too, if the penalty avoidance wasn't enough, the energy savings alone for our technology actually creates a less than 1 year payback. So there is an incentive for building owners to adopt this technology, especially when it's competitive, highly competitive with other HVAC technologies in terms of return on investment. So HVAC typically looks like this, where you're bringing in a lot of outside air, heating, cooling, dehumidifying it, supplying it to occupants, if you follow the green arrow there. The people inside of spaces where we spend 90% of our time, we are breathing, exhaling CO2, carpets, furniture is off-gassing. It's a buildup of indoor air pollutants. Now, typically, to deal with these indoor air pollutants, we do have some filtration, but a large amount of these pollutants are actually exhausted back to the outside. There is a little bit of return, but just based on indoor air pollutant buildup, you're not really able to keep an indoor air quality healthy by just recycling. This also does not deal with CO2 buildup because there is no commercially available technology right now to deal with carbon dioxide removal inside of buildings. And that's where our tech fits in. We are, again, this retrofit inside the return air duct. We are creating a side stream where a portion of the return air goes through our device. CO2 is scrubbed from the air, permanently sequestered into limestone, and we're also filtering out these other indoor air pollutants that I mentioned. And by being able to recycle this air back into the supply, we can reduce exhaust and reduce the amount of heating and cooling of outside air. So that is how we're able to achieve such significant energy savings, and we're already seeing these results live in the field and are happy to discuss what we're finding and potentials for deployments with anybody who's on the call. We'll have our contact information at the end so we can follow up about how this could actually significantly impact your building and avoid penalties. So now I want to dive into two case studies. These are buildings that are impacted by both Regulation 28 and Energize Denver. The first is a 200,000 square foot office building, Hudson Bay Center in Denver. Their current EUI is 80.8. So the metric used for this is kilobtu's per square foot. So they're about 81 kilobtus per square foot. Now, if you remember back to the savings for carbon reform at the building level, our technology can achieve around 16 to 20% building-wide energy reduction. So looking at this EUI target, our technology alone could get this building at 600 Stout Street down to about 67.9 kilobtus per square foot. Why that's really exciting is if you look below, you can see the first, second, and final targets by the year 2030 and what the EUI targets are associated with each state. And just by implementing carbon reforms technology, we can help this building meet the targets through the end of 2027. So to take this even one step further and to see a case where we could actually completely help a building through the end of the compliance period, I have the Denver South High School right here. This is a 320,000 square foot building, currently has an EUI of 56.2 BTU per square foot. Again, taking 16% reduction of that current site EUI, we would be able to decrease the EUI to about 47.2 which you can see is actually below even the final target of 48 by the end of the year 2030. And to note that this consistently will keep the EUI below 48, so you also avoid that additional compliance fine associated with not maintaining your site EUI. So we are, like I said, a 5-year-old company. We're based in Philadelphia. While our target right now is commercial buildings in the greater Mid-Atlantic area, we are actively exploring and have proposals out for buildings in Europe, Asia, and South America, because the decarbonization of buildings is not just a US problem. Commercial buildings everywhere have similar problems with meeting their net zero goals and finding ways to do it that are sustainable and scalable. And we have a really interesting and novel solution that can help a lot of these buildings. So far we have been partnering with local utility companies, national energy providers, major commercial real estate developers. We have several Fortune 500 companies in the pipeline that just own and lease a lot of their assets. So it's an opportunity to really help them meet their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions reduction. And we're also really focused on education, especially as it relates to the indoor air quality piece, because there's a lot of data to show that improvements in indoor air quality, specifically decreasing the level of carbon dioxide, which is shown to have negative health effects on cognition, it can really significantly impact student performance. And if we're talking about office spaces, that also improves worker productivity. It decreases sick building syndrome. So as much as we are a climate and energy efficiency technology, we're also very much a human health technology. I'm not going to go through all of these here, but I wanted to point out that one thing that comes up when we're talking to buildings, if there are opportunities to help offset the cost of the tech. And every state is different. Every utility program has different programs. But here are a few specific to Colorado and the utilities there that can help with financing the cost or providing low interest loans for buildings to adopt technology like ours. And as we are beginning to expand into the Colorado market, we're working with a lot of these programs so we can help our customers finance the equipment if they so choose. It's also worth noting, and some of you on the call might be familiar with this, there's a lot of national incentives and regulation tailwinds that are all sort of going in this direction of building decarbonization and energy efficiency. Specifically for any nonprofits or small businesses out there, this SBA, the Small Business Administration, has a really unique low interest loan program for buildings that can show they're reducing their energy use. And we are working with them to qualify as a provider for that. The Inflation Reduction Act, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, has a lot of opportunities for us and our customers to capitalize on the energy savings, the air quality as well. ASHRAE is the Association for Heating Refrigeration Engineers, and they sort of set these standards for what is acceptable indoor air quality, air changes per hour, outside air that needs to be brought in. They're beginning to look at one of their standards in particular that is inclusive of indoor air quality beyond ventilation. What that means is typically you have to deal with indoor air quality based on bringing in outside air and basically diluting the amount of pollutants that are inside of a building. But they're now thinking about if there's a way to reduce indoor air pollution inside of the building by effective scrubbing technology, there's other pathways to have better indoor air quality. The last thing too is, and you've most likely seen this on the news, there are several large companies that have pretty aggressive net zero goals. And we have a clear pathway to help all of them because they all have owned and leased real estate. So if anybody on this call is with a Fortune 500 or a large corporation, there is a chance that we can not only help your company with your scope 1 and 2 emissions, but by deploying our technology in your upstream and downstream partners, we can also help you with your scope 3 because your scope 3 is somebody else's scope 1 and 2. And if you have any questions about scope 1, 2, and 3, I'm happy to follow up after this call with anybody so we can dig more into that. So what's next for us at Carbon Reform? I should say, if you have any questions specifically, I have my email linked here, and I'm more than happy to have follow-up conversations with anybody that wants to dig more into how we can help their building, what the regulations mean for their building, and general strategy around building decarbonization. You can learn more about our complete line of solutions. So I mostly was talking about our carbon capsule, which is our flagship product, but we also have modular in-room units for air purification. We have a suite of sensors for indoor air quality measurement. All of that is available at carbonreform.com. Please feel free to check it out. And this is our first of many webinars where we are going to dive deeper into building performance standards and regulations in cities around the country. And this provides a list here of some of those other cities that we'll be touching on the rest of this year and into next. Please follow our blog at carbonreform.com, where we actually are posting about these regulations and writing thought pieces on them ahead of time. And those blogs are framing how we will actually go about these presentations. Again, this presentation will be available after this call for any attendees. So please feel free to share it with especially buildings that could be impacted by these regulations in Colorado, and anybody else who might be interested in a novel technology to help them meet their net zero goals. So with that, I'm going to start taking any questions. We have about 5 minutes or so. I want to make sure we wrap things up in under a half hour here, but if there's any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go. Okay, so Kim Folger says, how does this compare to other energy efficiency technology that can get me in compliance? So some of the other technologies that people or building owners might think about are things like heat pumps, energy recovery units. These are all great ways to improve energy efficiency. Worth noting that we do have this additional unlock of indoor air quality that typically you have to have two different solutions to get to that space, to get to those goals. But the CO2 removal specifically is a pathway to unlock energy savings that these other energy efficiency technologies cannot. And again, that's because by removing CO2, we can reduce the actual amount of heating and cooling of outside air beyond what a heat pump or other technology could achieve. Kim has another question. What type of building is ideal for the technology? So we are definitely looking at large-scale commercial buildings that are occupied, because building occupancy is how CO2 levels often are go above a limit that starts to become affecting how much energy is used for outside air. So a highly occupied office building, a school, a fitness center, an event space, all of those are ideal candidates. The other part of what's ideal, especially when we're talking about the carbon capsule, our flagship product, is the building infrastructure. So there needs to be ability for us to retrofit into the return air duct. So the building has to have return air capabilities so that we can create this side stream inside the HVAC system and recycle that air back to the supply. Now, worth noting, if you don't have a return air duct, we do have other solutions that are available at our website for more in-room air quality scrubbing, including CO2 removal. But for the flagship device, which is really going to get you to building-wide energy reduction, return air capabilities, high occupant density. What is the installation process for, and how long does it take? So we are, again, retrofitting into the return air duct. We're creating these, we basically add duct that comes in from the return into our device, and then the outlet goes back into the return air duct. This process takes a couple of hours. We're not actually interfering with the existing equipment. We're cutting small holes in the return air ducts themselves and putting our technology inside. So what's really exciting is if you're in particular buildings that have demand control ventilation set up, just by deploying our technology inside of a building, turning it on, removing CO2, it automatically will adjust the outside air present just because the building is already set up for demand control ventilation. So for those of you who are not familiar, demand control ventilation brings in fresh air based on occupancy, based on CO2 thresholds. And if we can continuously keep CO2 below a certain threshold, we never have to open the outside air damper above a certain limit. And that's really where we achieve these massive energy savings. So I think that's all the questions we have for today. Again, I thank you all for tuning in and listening to this presentation, learning a little bit more about Regulation 28, Energize Delaware, and the exciting work we're doing at Carbon Reform. I'm excited to have some follow-up conversations with folks that are attending, and I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.